A pregnant girl skips her family's Thanksgiving dinner to help a dying Hell's Angel trapped under his motorcycle in the freezing snow. Everyone else drove past, but she stopped. She thought it would be just one act of kindness, one good deed before the holiday was over. But when the man opens his eyes in the hospital, everything changes. He has no family, no home, no one who cares if he lives or dies. And now, the girl who lost her own family feels something she hasn't felt in a long time: purpose. She brings him home, against everyone's warnings. But what she doesn't know is that he carries a past darker than she could ever imagine. As secrets come to light, their lives twist together in ways neither saw coming, bound by guilt, grace, and a miracle that will test the limits of forgiveness. Because sometimes, the people the world throws away are the ones who end up saving us. So what happens? When the girl who gave up everything for kindness discovers that her act of mercy might just save both their souls. Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The morning sun barely penetrated the heavy clouds over Cedar Ridge as Hannah Myers hurried between tables at Joe's Diner, her pregnant belly making each step a careful dance. The familiar scent of coffee and maple syrup filled the air as she balanced plates of pancakes and eggs, trying to ignore the ache in her swollen feet. 7 months along, every shift felt like running a marathon. "Order up for table 6, called Bernie from the kitchen. Hannah grabbed the plates, steam rising from the hot food into the chilly November air. As she served an elderly couple their breakfast, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Her heart skipped. Probably another message from Mom about tonight's dinner. "You sure you want to go?" asked Sally, her fellow waitress and closest friend at the diner. The older woman's face creased with concern as she wiped down a nearby table. "Your mama hasn't exactly been welcoming these past few years." Hannah touched her belly self-consciously. "It's Thanksgiving, Sally. She invited me. That has to mean something, right?" Sally's expression softened. "Oh, honey, I just don't want to see you hurt again. Linda Myers has quite the reputation at First Baptist for running that gossip mill of hers. And the things she's said about you." "I know." Hannah's voice caught. The memories still stung. How her mother had stood in front of the entire congregation 2 years ago, asking for prayers for her wayward daughter. How the whispers had followed Hannah through the grocery store, the post office, everywhere in their small town. "But she's still my mom." The morning rush kept Hannah busy, but her mind wandered to the evening ahead. She'd rehearsed what she'd say 100 times. "I'm sorry, Mom. I've missed you. Can we start over?" The words felt inadequate after so much silence. As her shift wound down, Bernie called her to the kitchen window. "Hey, kid, take these leftover rolls home. Can't sell day-olds anyway." He pushed a paper bag across the counter, his gruff kindness making her eyes water. "Thanks, Bernie." Hannah gathered her things, wrapping her oversized thrift store coat around herself. The sleeve edges were frayed, but it mostly fit over her growing belly. Outside, fat snowflakes drifted from steel-gray clouds. Hannah's old pickup truck sat alone in the employee lot, a dusting of white already coating its rusty blue hood. The engine coughed to life on the third try. As she pulled onto Main Street, her phone buzzed again. A voicemail notification popped up, from Mom. Hannah's hands trembled as she played it at the stoplight. "Hannah, don't be late this time. The turkey will be ready at 6 o'clock sharp." Her mother's clipped tone carried years of disappointment. But underneath it, Hannah thought she heard something else. Hope. Longing. Or maybe she was just hearing what she wanted to hear. The highway stretched ahead, bordered by snow-covered pines. Hannah rehearsed her speech again, whispering the words like a prayer. "I'm sorry, Mom. I've missed you so much." Her baby kicked, as if adding emphasis to the words. The late afternoon light was fading fast, shadows lengthening across the snowy road. Hannah squinted through her windshield, where the wipers fought a losing battle against the thickening snow. Just a few more miles to the turnoff for her mother's house. Up ahead, something flickered through the swirling white. Red lights, pulsing in the gathering dusk. Hannah's heart jumped as she slowed her truck. There, sprawled across both lanes, lay a motorcycle on its side, chrome parts glinting dully in the fading light. No other vehicles were in sight, no police cars, no ambulance, just the fallen bike and those eerie flashing lights. Hannah pulled over, her hands shaking as she put the truck in park. The wind howled outside, whipping snow against her windows. She should call 911, but what if someone was hurt? Each second could matter. "Please, God," she whispered, reaching for her door handle. "Help me do the right thing." The blast of cold air took her breath away as she stepped out. Snow immediately soaked through her worn sneakers as she waded toward the accident scene. The motorcycle's wheels still spun slowly, casting strange shadows in the emergency lights. "Hello?" Hannah called out, wrapping her arms around herself. "Is anyone here? Do you need help?" Only the wind answered, howling through the trees. But then, there, in the ditch, something dark against the white snow. Hannah's heart pounded as she moved closer, careful of her footing on the icy shoulder. A figure lay crumpled at the bottom of the shallow ditch, partially hidden by drifting snow. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. The person wasn't moving. She fumbled for her phone with numb fingers, dialing 911 as she made her way down the slope. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker. 911, what's your emergency?" "There's been a motorcycle accident on Highway 14, about 3 miles east of Cedar Ridge," Hannah reported, trying to keep her voice steady. "I found someone in the ditch. They're not moving." "Is the person breathing? Can you safely check for a pulse?" Hannah reached the still form, a man in a leather jacket, his face obscured by a helmet. She knelt awkwardly in the snow beside him, her pregnant belly making it difficult to bend. With trembling fingers, she pressed against his neck, searching for a pulse. "I feel a heartbeat," she told the dispatcher. "It's there, but it seems weak." "Emergency services are on their way. Don't move the victim unless they're in immediate danger. Can you stay with them until help arrives?" Hannah looked at her phone's clock, 5:45. Her mother would be setting the table now, checking the turkey, waiting. The familiar weight of disappointment settled in her chest. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'll stay." She ended the call and tucked her phone away, then shrugged off her coat, laying it over the unconscious man. The bitter cold immediately bit through her thin waitress uniform, but she hardly noticed. All she could think about was this stranger, alone in a ditch on Thanksgiving, while somewhere his family waited, not knowing. "Help is coming," she told him, though she wasn't sure he could hear. "You're not alone. I'm right here." The snow fell harder, and Hannah huddled closer to the ground, trying to shield the man's face from the worst of it. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "Don't be late this time." But as Hannah looked at the stranger's still form, she knew she couldn't leave. Some things were more important than proving herself worthy of forgiveness. So she stayed, counting the minutes by her chattering teeth, praying under her breath. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her anxiety. Hannah rubbed her belly soothingly. "It's okay, little one," she whispered. "We're doing the right thing." Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, she heard sirens in the distance. Red and blue lights painted the falling snow in patriotic colors as emergency vehicles approached. Hannah struggled to her feet, waving her arms to flag them down. As paramedics rushed down the embankment with their equipment, she retrieved her coat and stepped back, watching them work with efficient precision. A police officer approached her, notebook in hand. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" Hannah explained how she'd found the scene, her voice shaking from cold and fading adrenaline. As she spoke, the paramedics carefully loaded the still unconscious man onto a stretcher. "You did the right thing," the officer told her kindly. "Not everyone would have stopped. Do you need a ride somewhere? You look frozen." Hannah shook her head, thinking of her mother's house, warm and bright with Thanksgiving preparations. But that door would be closed now, literally and figuratively. She'd made her choice. "No, thank you. I have my truck." She walked back to her vehicle slowly, her wet clothes stiff with cold. As she climbed inside, her phone showed 3 missed calls from her mother. Hannah stared at the screen until it went dark, then started her engine. The emergency vehicles pulled away, sirens silent now, but lights still flashing. Hannah watched until they disappeared into the swirling snow, carrying their anonymous passenger to warmth and care. She didn't regret her decision, but that didn't stop the tears from falling as she turned her truck around, heading back toward her empty apartment. Her mother would never understand why she'd chosen to help a stranger over keeping her promise. But maybe that was the difference between them. Hannah knew that sometimes love meant disappointing the people you cared about, if it meant doing what was right. The snow continued to fall as she drove home, each flake a reminder of the choices we make and the prices we pay for following our hearts. The tires of Hannah's old pickup crunched against fresh snow as she pulled onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking in the gathering storm. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she peered through the windshield at the scene before her. A massive Harley-Davidson motorcycle lay on its side, and beneath it, barely visible in the deepening twilight, was a motionless figure. Cars whooshed past on the slick road, their drivers seemingly oblivious to the accident, or perhaps they simply chose not to stop. Hannah's hands gripped the steering wheel as she wrestled with her conscience. The baby kicked, as if urging her to action, and she knew she couldn't just drive away. "Please, Lord," she whispered, reaching for her phone. "Help me do the right thing." Hannah stepped out into the biting wind, her waitress uniform offering little protection against the cold. She moved carefully down the slight embankment, one hand steadying her pregnant belly while the other held her phone's flashlight. As she drew closer, details emerged that made her pulse quicken. The man was older, probably in his 50s, with a gray-streaked beard and arms covered in tattoos. His leather vest, now torn and dirty, bore the unmistakable patch of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. A passing semi-truck's headlights illuminated the scene briefly, and Hannah saw how the motorcycle had him pinned at an awkward angle. The man's face was pale, his lips taking on a bluish tinge that scared her more than his appearance did. "Sir?" she called out, kneeling beside him as best she could. "Can you hear me?" Her trembling fingers found his neck, searching for a pulse while her other hand automatically went to her belly, as if to shield her unborn child from the gravity of the moment. The thrum of life beneath her fingertips was weak but present. A low groan escaped the man's lips, followed by a string of colorful curses that made Hannah's cheeks flush despite the cold. His eyes flickered open, unfocused and glassy with pain. "Get lost, girl," he growled, his voice rough like gravel. "Don't need no help." Hannah ignored his protest, already dialing 911 with shaking fingers. "This is an emergency," she said when the dispatcher answered. "There's been a motorcycle accident on Highway 40, about 2 miles east of Cedar Ridge. A man's pinned under his bike, and he's barely conscious." While she gave more details to the dispatcher, Hannah shrugged off her coat. It wasn't much, but she draped it over the man's chest, trying to protect him from the falling snow. Remembering the old blanket she kept in her truck for emergencies, she hurried back to retrieve it. "Don't need your charity," the man muttered when she returned, but his voice was weaker now, slurring slightly. "My name's Hannah," she said softly, tucking the blanket around him. "What's yours?" He was quiet so long she thought he'd passed out, but then, "Luke," They call me Blaze. Stay with me, Luke, Hannah urged, noticing how his eyes kept drifting shut. Help is coming. She positioned herself to shield his face from the worst of the wind and snow, barely noticing how her own body shook with cold. Her hands found his head, cradling it slightly off the frozen ground. Through gaps in the falling snow, car headlights painted the scene in alternating bands of gold and shadow, like some strange dream. Luke's eyes focused on her suddenly, sharp with confusion. Why'd you stop? Smart girl like you shouldn't be out here, helping someone like me. Hannah thought about her mother's waiting dinner table, about all the judgmental faces she'd endured in town since her pregnancy began showing. Because, she said simply, everyone deserves help when they're hurting. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, flashing lights appeared in the distance. Hannah had never been so grateful to see an ambulance in her life. The paramedics worked quickly, carefully freeing Luke from beneath the motorcycle and assessing his injuries. You're one lucky man, one of them told Luke as they loaded him onto a stretcher. Another few minutes in this cold. He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. The paramedic turned to Hannah, who stood shivering in her thin uniform, arms wrapped around herself. You did good, miss. Not many would have stopped on a night like this. Hannah watched the ambulance pull away, its lights cutting through the swirling snow. Only then did she notice her phone had been buzzing. 6 missed calls from her mother. With trembling fingers, she pressed play on the latest voicemail. Her mother's voice filled the cab of her truck, sharp with disappointment. I should have known better than to expect you to keep your word, Hannah. The turkey's ruined, just like everything else. You always disappoint me. The words hit Hannah like physical blows. She made it as far as the gas and go at the edge of town before the tears started falling. Pulling into the darkest corner of the lot, she let out all the pain and frustration she'd been holding back, about her mother's rejection, about the lonely months of pregnancy, about the way people looked at her like she was nothing but a cautionary tale. The baby kicked again, gentler this time, as if trying to comfort her. Hannah wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, unaware that her simple act of kindness on this snowy Thanksgiving night had set in motion changes that would reshape not just her life, but Luke's as well. For now, she was just a young woman alone in a dark parking lot, her dinner growing cold in the passenger seat, trying to find strength in knowing she'd done the right thing. The snow continued to fall outside her truck windows, and somewhere in town, a church bell tolled 7 times. Hannah sat in the darkness, one hand resting on her swollen belly, and tried to find peace in the quiet aftermath of her choice. Hannah woke before sunrise, her back aching from the cheap mattress in her studio apartment. Sleep had been elusive, her mind replaying the image of Luke lying in the snow. After a restless night, she'd made up her mind. She had to know if he was okay. The morning shift at the diner dragged by, each minute ticking slower than the last. By 2 o'clock, she'd changed out of her uniform and driven to Cedar Ridge Memorial Hospital, a weathered brick building that seemed to sag under the gray November sky. At the front desk, Hannah cleared her throat. I'm here to see Luke Henders. He was brought in last night after a motorcycle accident. The receptionist's eyebrows rose. Are you family? No, I found him. I was the one who called 911. Nurse Clara Jensen looked up from her paperwork, her stern face creasing with disapproval. That man's been trouble all his life. One of those Hell's Angels, nothing but fights and arrests. Best to leave well enough alone, dear. Hannah's fingers twisted the strap of her purse. Has anyone come to see him? Not a soul, Clara said, shaking her head. And no surprise there. Room 315, but don't say we didn't warn you. The elevator smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. Hannah's reflection in the metal doors showed dark circles under her eyes, her brown hair escaping its ponytail. The baby kicked, as if sensing her nervousness. Room 315 was at the end of a quiet hallway. Hannah knocked softly, then pushed the door open. The afternoon light filtered through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across Luke's bed. His leg was elevated in a cast, and purple bruises bloomed across his weathered face. The tattoos on his arms seemed darker against the white hospital sheets. Luke's eyes opened, sharp blue, alert despite the pain medication. Recognition flickered across his face, quickly, replaced by a scowl. "Well, if it ain't the roadside angel," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Come to collect your good deed points for the day?" Hannah stepped into the room, holding up the paper bag she'd brought. "I brought soup, from the diner where I work." "Ain't that sweet?" His laugh was bitter. "Playing the good girl act? Should have minded your own business last night. I didn't ask for help." "You didn't have to ask." Hannah set the soup on his tray. "Nobody should freeze alone in the snow." "Save the sermon." Luke shifted in the bed, wincing. "I've had enough church ladies trying to save my soul over the years." Hannah touched her belly unconsciously. "I'm not exactly in the church lady's good graces these days." Something in her tone made Luke look at her, really look at her, for the first time. His eyes took in her pregnant form, her simple clothes, the tired slump of her shoulders. For a moment, his hard expression wavered. "You forgot something last night," he said gruffly, reaching for something beside the bed. It was her coat, folded awkwardly with one hand. "Don't need your charity." Hannah took the coat, remembering how she'd draped it over him in the snow. "It wasn't charity. It was just being human." Luke turned his face toward the window. "Yeah, well, you did your good deed. Go on home now, wherever that is." Hannah lingered in the doorway. "The soup's still hot. You should eat it while it's warm." When he didn't respond, she added softly, "Goodbye, Luke." The drive home was quiet, snow starting to fall again. Hannah's apartment building loomed ahead, a tired 3-story walk-up on the edge of town. Her studio apartment was on the top floor, barely big enough for a bed and kitchenette. The baby's second-hand crib was still in pieces, leaning against one wall. Hannah hung her coat by the door and sank onto her bed. The only decoration in the room was a photograph tucked into her mirror frame, herself at 16, standing beside her mother outside their church, both smiling before everything fell apart. Before shame and judgment had carved a canyon between them that seemed impossible to cross. Kneeling beside her bed, Hannah closed her eyes. "Lord," she whispered, "I don't understand why I can't stop thinking about him. Everyone says he's trouble, that he doesn't deserve help. But when I saw him lying there..." She paused, remembering Luke's eyes, the loneliness she'd glimpsed beneath his anger. Maybe that's exactly why he needs it most. The baby stirred within her, and Hannah rested her hand on her swollen belly. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Cedar Ridge in a blanket of white. In her tiny apartment, with nothing but a growing belly and an old photograph to her name, Hannah wondered what tomorrow would bring. In the deepening dusk, she found herself remembering Luke's gruff voice, the way he'd folded her coat despite his injuries. There was something there, something more than the hardened criminal everyone claimed him to be. Something worth saving, even if he didn't believe it himself. Her hands absently folded the coat he'd returned, fingers finding a small tear in the sleeve from where it had caught on the motorcycle. She'd have to mend it tomorrow. For now, she was tired, bone-tired from more than just a sleepless night. Tired of judgments, of closed doors, of people deciding who deserved compassion and who didn't. The apartment grew darker, but Hannah didn't turn on the lights. She sat in the gathering shadows, one hand on her belly, the other holding the old photograph, wondering how many others in Cedar Ridge were spending this night alone, and why it mattered so much that Luke was one of them. 2 days after her first visit, Hannah pushed through the hospital's revolving doors, shaking snow from her boots. The smell of disinfectant filled her nose as she made her way to Luke's room. But before she could reach it, voices from the nurse's station caught her attention. "We need the bed by tonight," Nurse Clara Jensen was saying, her tone clipped. "Insurance won't cover another day." "But where's he supposed to go?" another nurse asked. "I called the shelter on Pine Street." Clara shuffled some papers. "They won't take him. Said they looked up his record, did time for assault back in 2008. Can't have someone like that around the other residents." Hannah's heart sank. She peeked around the corner, seeing Luke through his doorway. He sat on the edge of his bed, struggling to pull a worn leather boot over his cast. Taking a deep breath, Hannah walked into his room. "Going somewhere?" Luke didn't look up. "Getting kicked out. Guess they need the bed for someone more worthy." "Where will you go?" "None of your business." He grimaced, still fighting with the boot. "Always land on my feet." Hannah watched him struggle, noting how he couldn't put weight on his injured leg. The cast ran from his knee to his ankle, at least 6 more weeks of healing ahead. Outside, the wind howled, carrying fresh snow against the windows. "I have a spare room," she heard herself say. Luke's head snapped up. "What?" "It's small," Hannah continued, her voice stronger than she felt. "Used to be a den, but it has a bed and it's warm. Listen, girl." Luke's voice was sharp. "I don't need your pity. I've survived worse than a broken leg." "It's not pity." Hannah met his gaze. "It's practical. You need a place to heal. I have space." "Yeah? And what would your neighbors think about a Hell's Angel moving in? What about your husband?" His eyes dropped to her pregnant belly. "There is no husband." Hannah's cheeks flushed. "And I don't care what the neighbors think. It's my apartment." Luke studied her face, searching for ulterior motives. Finding none, his shoulders slumped slightly. "You're either the kindest person I've ever met or the craziest." "Maybe both." Hannah attempted a smile. "Let me help. Just until you're healed." After a long moment, Luke nodded once, gruffly. "Ain't got much choice, do I?" The next few hours passed in a blur of discharge papers and prescriptions. Hannah helped Luke navigate the hospital's wheelchair policy, enduring disapproving looks from the staff. Clara pulled her aside at one point, voice low. "You don't know what you're getting into, honey. Men like that don't change." Hannah just smiled politely and wheeled Luke to her pickup truck. The drive to her apartment was silent, except for the squeak of old windshield wipers fighting the snow. Luke clutched his crutches, staring straight ahead. When they arrived, Hannah helped him up the 3 flights of stairs, each step accompanied by the hollow sound of his crutch on wood. Her apartment felt smaller with Luke in it. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the living room while Hannah opened the spare room door. "It's not much," she apologized, flicking on the light. A twin bed filled most of the space, with just enough room for a small dresser. But the mattress is clean, and the heater works most days. Luke hobbled in, taking in the faded wallpaper and single window. "Better than a cell," he muttered, then caught himself. "I mean, it's fine. Thanks." Hannah busied herself making soup in the kitchenette while Luke settled in. The familiar motions of chopping vegetables and stirring broth helped calm her nerves. What was she thinking, inviting a stranger, an ex-convict, into her home? Yet, something in her gut told her it was right. When the soup was ready, she carried 2 bowls to the small table. "Would you like to say grace?" she asked automatically, then wished she hadn't. Luke's face darkened. "Gave up on that a long time ago. God and I ain't exactly on speaking terms." They ate in silence, broken only by the wind rattling the windows and the occasional clink of spoons against bowls. Hannah tried not to stare at Luke's tattoos, at the way his large frame seemed to make her furniture shrink. After dinner, Hannah showed Luke where to find extra blankets and towels. Bathroom's down the hall. The hot water's a little temperamental, but if you jiggle the handle, I'll figure it out. Luke cut her off, but his tone was less harsh than before. You don't need to fuss. Hannah retreated to her bedroom, changing into warm pajamas. Through the thin walls, she could hear Luke moving around, followed by deep, rattling coughs that made her wince. She knelt beside her bed, clasping her hands. Lord, she whispered, I hope I did the right thing. Please, please let this be your will and not just my stubborn heart. The baby kicked, as if in response. Snow continued to fall outside her window, adding to the blanket of white covering Cedar Ridge. In the spare room, Luke coughed again, and Hannah heard the creak of bed springs as he settled in. 2 broken souls, she thought, brought together by a winter storm. What would tomorrow bring? The question hung in the air as Hannah pulled her covers up, listening to the wind's lonely song and the occasional sound of movement from the next room. Through her window, streetlights painted the falling snow in shades of gold, like stars falling to earth. The same snow that had brought them together on that dark highway now sealed them in, 2 unlikely housemates waiting for morning. Dawn crept through the frosted windows, painting Hannah's small kitchen in pale winter light. She stood at the stove, carefully cracking eggs into a pan while keeping one eye on the toaster. The familiar morning sounds, sizzling butter, the coffee maker's gentle gurgle, almost made everything feel normal. Almost. A thump and muffled curse from the hallway announced Luke's approach. He appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on his crutch, his face tight with pain. Morning, Hannah said softly, sliding 2 eggs onto a chipped plate. I hope you like them over easy. Luke grunted in response, easing himself into a kitchen chair. The toast popped up, slightly darker than intended, and Hannah hurried to butter it before it cooled. Sorry about the toast, she apologized, setting the plate in front of him. This toaster has a mind of its own. Had worse in prison, Luke muttered, then seemed to regret his words. He picked up his fork, avoiding her eyes. Thanks. Hannah poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him, her own plate steaming. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the scrape of forks and the occasional sip of coffee. So, Hannah ventured, how's the leg feeling? Like it got run over by a truck. Luke paused. Or a motorcycle. A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face, and Hannah felt something in her chest loosen slightly. Maybe this strange arrangement could work after all. You know, Luke said after a while, studying his coffee. Most people wouldn't take in someone like me. Especially not. He gestured vaguely at her pregnant belly. Hannah set down her fork. My mama always said never to trust men like you. She met his eyes steadily. But Mama also said a lot of things that weren't exactly Christ-like. Luke's expression darkened. Your mama sounds smart about some things. I rode with the angels for 15 years. Did things I ain't proud of. He pushed his empty plate away. Prison was probably the best thing that could have happened. How long? Hannah asked quietly. 5 years. Got out 8 months ago. Luke's fingers traced an old tattoo on his forearm. Left the club after. Some things you can't go back to. Hannah nodded, gathering the dishes. Everyone deserves a second chance. That what you're hoping for? Luke's voice was gruff but not unkind. A second chance with your mama? Hannah's hands stilled in the soapy water. Maybe. But right now I'm just trying to do what's right. As the days passed, a routine emerged. Hannah would leave early for her shifts at the diner, returning home to find small changes around the apartment. The squeaky front door suddenly worked smoothly. The dripping kitchen faucet stopped its endless plink, plink, plink. Even the temperamental bathroom handle seemed to behave. One afternoon, She came home to find Luke outside, laboriously shoveling snow from the building's small porch, despite his injured leg. "You shouldn't be doing that," she called, hurrying up the walkway. "You'll hurt yourself worse." Luke leaned on the shovel, breathing hard. "Can't just sit around all day watching you work yourself to death." He gestured at her belly. "Besides, somebody's got to clear this mess before you slip." Hannah wanted to argue but saw the determination in his face. Instead, she helped him back inside and made hot chocolate, pretending not to notice how he winced with each step. That evening, as usual, Hannah sat in her worn armchair with her Bible. Luke sprawled on the couch, pretending to watch an old Western on the tiny television while she read aloud softly. "The Lord is my shepherd," her voice carried gently through the room. "I shall not want." Luke rolled his eyes but didn't comment. Hannah had noticed he never asked her to stop, though sometimes she caught him listening despite himself. The sharp knock on the door made them both jump. Hannah marked her place in the Bible and opened it to find Mr. Peterson, her landlord, standing there with a stern expression. "Miss Myers." He thrust a paper toward her. "This is your second late notice. One more, and I'll have to start eviction proceedings." Hannah's fingers trembled as she took the warning. "I'm sorry, Mr. Peterson. I'll have it by next week, I promise." The landlord's eyes flicked past her to Luke's imposing figure on the couch, then back to her pregnant belly. His disapproval was palpable. "See that you do." He turned and left without another word. Hannah closed the door softly, pressing her forehead against the cool wood. She could feel tears threatening but blinked them back. When she turned around, Luke was watching her with an unreadable expression. "It's okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "God will provide." Luke's face hardened. "Don't count on him too much." He shifted on the couch, wincing. "Way I see it, God's got better things to do than worry about rent money." Hannah clutched the warning notice, crumpling it slightly. "He's never failed me before." "Yeah?" Luke's voice was bitter. "Where was he when you got pregnant and thrown out? Where was he when your mama turned her back on you?" The words hit Hannah like a physical blow. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the baby move. "He was there," she said quietly. "He sent me people who helped. The diner manager who gave me extra shifts, Mrs. Wilson from 3 doors down who gave me her old maternity clothes." She looked at Luke meaningfully. "He works through people, if we let him." Luke looked away, but Hannah saw something shift in his expression. He stared out the window at the falling snow, his weathered hands clasped tightly in his lap. Though he said nothing more, his mind was clearly working, planning something he wasn't ready to share. Hannah smoothed out the crumpled warning notice and placed it carefully on the kitchen counter. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. For now, she had a roof over her head, a healthy baby growing inside her, and an unlikely guardian angel in her spare room, even if he didn't believe in angels himself. The winter morning bit hard as Luke stood by the window, watching Hannah's pickup disappear around the corner. His leg throbbed, but something else ached deeper. The rent warning sat on the counter like an accusation. He knew what he had to do. Gritting his teeth, he grabbed his crutch and shuffled to the spare room. Under the bed lay a worn duffel bag containing everything he owned. Luke pulled out a carefully folded black leather vest, running his calloused fingers over the patches. Each one told a story. Roads traveled, battles fought, brotherhoods sworn. The Hells Angels MC patch on the back represented 30 years of his life. "Ain't worth nothing now anyway," he muttered, but his hands shook as he stuffed it into a plastic bag. The walk to Eddie's pawn shop took twice as long with his injured leg. Every step sent shooting pains up his thigh, but Luke pressed on, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. The shop's neon "open" sign flickered weakly in the gray morning light. A bell jingled as he pushed through the door. Eddie Ramirez looked up from behind the counter, his eyes narrowing at Luke's appearance. "Well, well, the mighty have fallen," Eddie said, setting aside his newspaper. "What brings a Hell's Angel to my humble establishment?" Luke dropped the plastic bag on the counter. "Need cash." Eddie pulled out the vest, examining it with expert eyes. His fingers traced the patches, lingering over the club insignia. Authentic pieces like this could fetch a good price from collectors. He glanced at Luke. "Though I gotta wonder why a member would part with it." "Ex-member," Luke corrected. "How much?" Eddie laid the vest flat, making a show of inspection. $600. It's worth more than that. Maybe to someone who doesn't know what the Hell's Angels have become. Eddie's voice dripped with disdain. Used to be men of honor, even if they were outlaws. Now look, pawning their colors like common beggars. Luke's fists clenched, old instincts rising. Time was, he'd have laid Eddie out for less. But Hannah's face flashed in his mind. Her kindness, her trust. He forced his fingers to relax. 600, he said quietly. Fine. Eddie counted out the bills, his movements deliberately slow. Never thought I'd see the day Blaze Henders would go soft. Luke pocketed the money without responding. The bell jingled again as he left, not looking back at the piece of his past now hanging in Eddie's window. The walk home was torture. His legs screamed with every step, the cold seeping into his bones. But the envelope in his pocket kept him moving. $600, enough to cover Hannah's overdue rent with a little extra for groceries. Back at the apartment, Luke sank into the armchair, exhaustion and pain overwhelming him. He placed the envelope on the kitchen counter where Hannah would see it. As his eyes grew heavy, he wondered when he'd started caring so much about helping someone else. Hours later, the sound of keys in the lock roused him. Hannah entered, shaking snow from her coat. She spotted the envelope immediately, picking it up with trembling fingers. "Luke!" Her voice wavered. "What is this?" He kept his eyes closed, pretending to sleep. Through barely open lids, he watched her count the money, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "Luke, I know you're awake. Where did this come from?" He sighed, opening his eyes. "Don't worry about it." $600? Of course I'm going to worry about it. She moved closer, her face concerned. "Did you do something dangerous? Are you in trouble?" "Nothing like that." He shifted uncomfortably. "Just sold something I didn't need anymore." The next morning, Hannah marched straight to Mr. Peterson's office with the rent money. She returned beaming, waving the withdrawn eviction notice like a victory flag. That evening, she confronted him in the kitchen. "I saw the empty hanger in your closet," she said softly. "Your vest. That was your whole life." Luke stared at his coffee. "Just leather and patches." "Why would you do that?" Her voice cracked slightly. "For me?" He shrugged, uncomfortable with the emotion in her eyes. "Guess I owed you one. You didn't owe me anything. You saved my life." He finally met her gaze. "Nobody's done something like that for me in a long time, not without wanting something in return." Hannah touched his arm gently. "That's what people are supposed to do. Help each other." The moment stretched between them, quiet and genuine. Luke felt something shift in his chest, like a rusty door creaking open. Later that night, after Hannah had gone to bed, Luke found a small silver cross pendant on the kitchen table near his chair. Simple, unadorned, just like its owner. He didn't pick it up, but he didn't move it either. He sat there long into the night, the cross glinting in the darkness, wondering how a pregnant waitress and an act of kindness had managed to shake loose everything he thought he knew about the world. The December wind howled outside Hannah's apartment, rattling the windows like angry fists. Inside, The old radiator had finally given up with a last wheezing gasp, leaving them in a steadily cooling space that grew more uncomfortable by the hour. Hannah struck another match, lighting the 5th candle she'd found in her kitchen drawer. The warm glow spread across the living room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "At least it's pretty," she said, trying to stay positive despite her chattering teeth. Luke watched her from his chair, noting how she rubbed her arms through her thick sweater. Without a word, he hobbled to the closet and returned with 2 blankets. "Here," he said, draping one around her shoulders. "Can't have you catching pneumonia." "Thank you." She pulled the blanket tight, grateful for its warmth. "I should start dinner. Soup sounds good on a night like this." In the kitchen, Hannah began chopping vegetables for a hearty stew, the rhythmic sound of her knife against the cutting board filling the silence. Luke sat at the small table, his injured leg propped on a chair, watching her work. "You remind me of someone," he said suddenly, his voice rough with memory. Hannah glanced over her shoulder. "Who?" "My ex-wife, Sarah. She used to cook like that, everything from scratch. Said you couldn't rush good food." He gave a bitter laugh. "Course, that was before I ruined everything." Hannah added the vegetables to the pot, then turned to face him. What happened? Luke was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with regret. "I chose the club over my family. Thought I was living the dream, freedom, brotherhood, respect. What I really did was throw away the only people who ever truly cared about me." "Your son," Hannah said softly, remembering fragments of conversation from previous days. "Eli, right?" Luke nodded, his weathered face tight with pain that had nothing to do with his injured leg. "He's a sheriff's deputy now, 30 years old. Hasn't spoken to me in 12 years. He traced a pattern on the table with his finger. "Sometimes I drive by the station just to catch a glimpse of him. He looks so much like his mother." Hannah stirred the stew, adding spices as Luke continued to speak, as if a dam had broken inside him. "Did 3 stretches in prison. Last one was 5 years. His laugh was hollow. "You know what prison does to a man? Makes him hard, cold, turns him into someone people cross the street to avoid." He looked down at his tattooed hands. "Can't blame them, really. I became exactly what they thought I was." Hannah set 2 bowls of steaming stew on the table, along with some crusty bread she'd brought home from the diner. "People can be quick to judge," she said, sitting across from him. "Trust me, I know." "The church?" Luke asked, remembering previous conversations. She nodded, wrapping her hands around her bowl for warmth. "When I told them I was pregnant, you'd think I'd committed murder. The whispers, the looks. My own mother called me an embarrassment to the congregation." Her voice caught. 18 years of perfect attendance, teaching Sunday school, leading youth group. None of it mattered. One mistake, and suddenly I was a stranger. "That's rough," Luke said quietly. "At least I earned my bad reputation." "Did you?" Hannah challenged gently. "Or did you just start living up to what people expected?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with truth neither had voiced before. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the world in white silence. "You want to know something?" Luke said finally, pushing his empty bowl aside. "That night, on the road, I wasn't just caught in the storm. I was done. Tired of fighting, tired of being alone." He met her eyes. "Until you stopped." Hannah's hand found his across the table, squeezing gently. Maybe God didn't forget either of us. Luke didn't pull away, though such contact would have made him uncomfortable just weeks ago. They sat in companionable silence as the candles burned lower, casting warm light on their faces. The heat from the stew and their shared confidences seemed to have warmed the room, or perhaps they'd just stopped noticing the cold. Hannah's eyes grew heavy as the evening wore on, and eventually she dozed off on the couch, her blanket slipping from her shoulders. Luke watched her for a moment, noting how young she looked in sleep, how vulnerable. With surprising gentleness for hands so rough, he adjusted the blanket, tucking it around her carefully. As he did so, something shifted in his expression, the habitual hardness softening into something like peace. He returned to his chair, keeping watch in the candlelight as snow continued to fall outside their windows, transforming the world into something clean and new. The morning of December 24th dawned cold and bright, sunlight sparkling off fresh snow. Hannah stood at her tiny kitchen window, sipping coffee and watching the neighborhood children build snowmen. Her hand absently rubbed her swollen belly, feeling the baby's gentle kicks. "We need to talk." Luke's gruff voice came from behind her. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, leaning on his crutch. Though his leg was healing well, he still needed support to walk. But there was something different about his expression today, a determination she hadn't seen before. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down her cup. "Nothing's wrong. But you need to go home today." Hannah's heart skipped a beat. "What?" "To your mother's. It's Christmas Eve, Hannah. You shouldn't be here with an old broken-down biker when your family's waiting." She gave a bitter laugh. "My family isn't waiting, Luke. You know that." "Maybe they are, and you're both too stubborn to make the first move." He hobbled to the kitchen table and sat down heavily. "Look, I've been thinking about this a lot. You took me in when nobody else would. You showed me kindness when I didn't deserve it. But I can't let you spend Christmas alone because of me." "I'm not alone," Hannah protested. "I have you, and the baby." "And you need your mother," Luke cut in firmly. "Trust me on this. I know what it's like to lose family and wish every day you could take it back." His weathered face softened. "Besides, I'm coming with you." Hannah stared at him. "You're what?" "You heard me. If your mother's going to judge you, she can do it to both our faces. I've got some things I need to say to her." "Luke, no. You don't understand. She'll take one look at you and what? Think I'm not good enough to be in her house?" He gave a harsh laugh. "Wouldn't be the first time, sweetheart. But I'm going." End of discussion. Hannah wanted to argue further, but something in Luke's expression stopped her. She recognized the look in his eyes, the same determination she'd felt that night on the highway when she'd refused to leave him in the snow. The drive to her mother's house took 20 minutes, each passing minute increasing Hannah's anxiety. Luke sat quietly beside her in the passenger seat, watching the snow-covered landscape roll by. Her old pickup truck groaned as they climbed the steep hill leading to her childhood home. "Nice place," Luke commented as they pulled up to the 2-story colonial with its perfectly maintained yard and wraparound porch. Even now, Christmas lights twinkled along the eaves, and a wreath hung on the bright red door. Hannah's hands trembled as she turned off the engine. "Maybe this isn't such a good idea." "It is." Luke opened his door, grimacing as he maneuvered his injured leg out. "Come on." The walk to the front door felt like miles. Snow was starting to fall again, large flakes drifting lazily from a pearl-gray sky. Hannah's heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe as she raised her hand to knock. Before her knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung open. Linda Myers stood there, elegant in a cream-colored sweater, her gray-streaked hair perfectly styled. Her eyes widened as she took in the sight before her heavily pregnant daughter and the grizzled biker standing protectively at her side. "Hannah?" Linda's voice was barely a whisper. "Hi, Mom." Hannah's voice quavered. "Merry Christmas." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Linda's gaze shifted to Luke, taking in his tattoos, his leather jacket, the crutch under his arm. Her expression hardened. "What is this?" she demanded. "Who is he?" "Mom, this is Luke. He's—" "I know what he is," Linda cut in coldly. "I can see exactly what he is. Hannah, how could you bring someone like this here? Haven't you chosen enough shame over your family?" Hannah flinched as if she'd been slapped. Luke felt her trembling beside him, and something inside him snapped. "Ma'am," he said, his gravelly voice carrying quiet authority. "Before you say another word, I'd like you to hear something." Linda drew herself up, ready to order him off her property, but Luke continued before she could speak. "Your daughter saved my life. Found me dying on the side of the road Thanksgiving night. That's why she missed your dinner. She was too busy keeping me alive until the ambulance came." He met Linda's startled gaze steadily. "She gave me her coat to keep me warm, stayed with me in the snow, prayed over me when I was cursing at her to leave me alone. That's something good folks do, ma'am, even when they're being judged for it." Color drained from Linda's face. "Thanksgiving night?" she whispered. "Yes, ma'am. And when I had nowhere to go after the hospital, she took me in, fed me, showed me more kindness than I've seen in 20 years. His voice roughened. "I've known a lot of people who talk about being Christian. Your daughter's one of the few I've met who actually lives it." Tears welled in Linda's eyes. She looked at Hannah as if seeing her for the first time. Not the shame she'd been carrying for months, but the daughter she'd raised. "You saved his life?" she asked softly. Hannah nodded, her own eyes filling. "I couldn't just leave him there, Mom. I know what it's like to feel abandoned." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Linda's carefully maintained facade cracked. She covered her mouth with one hand, a sob escaping. "Oh, Hannah," she whispered. "I've missed you every single day." "Mom!" Hannah's voice broke. Linda stepped forward and pulled her daughter into her arms. They clung to each other, both crying now, years of hurt and loneliness melting like snow in sunshine. "I'm so sorry," Linda whispered against Hannah's hair. "I was so wrong. So proud and wrong." Luke stood quietly, watching mother and daughter reunite. Something tight in his chest loosened, a weight he hadn't even known he was carrying lifting away. When Linda finally pulled back and looked at him, her eyes were different, softer, humbled. "Would you both like to come in?" she asked. "I was just about to make hot chocolate." The interior of the house was warm and smelled of cinnamon and pine. Linda fussed over them both, insisting Luke take the most comfortable chair, bringing them steaming mugs and Christmas cookies. As afternoon faded into evening, Hannah watched her mother and Luke talking quietly by the fireplace, about faith, about forgiveness, about second chances. The drive home that night was peaceful. Snow fell steadily, transforming the world into something magical and new. Hannah couldn't stop smiling, joy radiating from her like light. Beside her, Luke sat quietly, a faint smile playing around his mouth, the first real smile she'd seen from him. In the soft glow of the dashboard lights, she could see the peace in his expression, as if decades of guilt and shame had finally begun to lift. Neither spoke, but they didn't need to. Sometimes the most important changes happen in silence, in the quiet moments when hearts finally find their way home. The morning sun filtered through frost-covered windows as Hannah made breakfast, humming softly. The kitchen smelled of coffee and cinnamon toast, a peaceful start to what should have been an ordinary day. Luke had insisted on fixing the squeaky cabinet door that had been bothering her for weeks, despite her protests that he should rest. "Ain't gonna let a pregnant woman climb on chairs," he grumbled good-naturedly, positioning himself on a step stool. His crutch leaned against the counter as he worked, his movements careful but determined. Hannah watched him from the corner of her eye while washing dishes. The past few weeks had softened something in Luke, the hard edges of his personality wearing smooth like river stones. Since the Christmas Eve visit with her mother, he'd seemed different, more at peace. The quiet morning shattered when Luke suddenly gasped. The screwdriver clattered to the floor as he clutched his chest, face contorting in pain. "Luke!" Hannah turned, heart racing. "What's wrong?" He tried to answer but couldn't catch his breath. His legs buckled, and he collapsed, crumpling to the kitchen floor with a heavy thud. "Luke!" Hannah screamed, rushing to his side. Her hands trembled as she touched his face. His skin was clammy, lips turning blue. "Oh, God, please no!" She fumbled for her phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. "Please, I need help," she cried to the dispatcher. "He's not breathing right. Please hurry." The minutes until the ambulance arrived felt like hours. Hannah held Luke's hand, praying desperately as his breathing grew more labored. When the paramedics burst through the door, she could barely step back to let them work, her whole world narrowing to the sight of Luke's ashen face. At the hospital, they whisked him away for tests while Hannah paced the waiting room, one hand pressed to her swollen belly as if to steady herself. When the doctor finally appeared, his expression made her heart sink. "Ms. Myers?" he said gently. "Please sit down." The news hit her like a physical blow. Years of drug use had weakened Luke's heart. Recent infections, likely from the motorcycle accident, had caused further damage. Without surgery, risky, complicated surgery, he wouldn't survive much longer. "Can I see him?" she whispered. Luke lay propped up in the hospital bed, looking smaller somehow without his usual gruff energy. Machines beeped steadily around him, monitoring his damaged heart. "They told you?" he asked when she entered, voice rough. Hannah nodded, pulling a chair close to his bedside. "The doctor says with surgery." "No." Luke's voice was firm despite its weakness. "No surgery." "But Luke, kid, I'm not worth saving twice." He managed a faint smile. "You already did that once, remember? On that cold road. That was more than I deserved." "Don't say that," Hannah pleaded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please, Luke, let them help you." He reached out, patting her hand awkwardly. "You focus on that baby of yours. That's what matters now. Me? I've made my peace." "I haven't." The words burst from her. "You can't just give up." But Luke's expression remained gentle, resolute. "Sometimes letting go isn't giving up, Hannah. It's just accepting grace when it's offered." Hannah bowed her head, shoulders shaking with sobs. Outside the window, snow began to fall, thick white flakes drifting past like feathers. She clasped Luke's weathered hand between both of hers, feeling its growing coldness. "If you're listening, Lord," she whispered, her tears falling onto their joined hands. "Please don't take him yet. Please." Luke's fingers tightened slightly around hers as the snow continued to fall, transforming the world outside into a blank white canvas, while inside the hospital room, a young woman prayed for a miracle she wasn't sure she deserved to ask for. 3 days after Luke's collapse, the sky turned an ominous gray. Hannah sat by his bedside, her swollen belly making it hard to find a comfortable position in the plastic hospital chair. The doctors had kept him sedated, hoping to give his heart time to strengthen before the surgery he still refused. Outside, the first flakes of what weathermen called the storm of the century began to fall. Hannah winced as another contraction rippled through her. They'd been coming all morning, but she'd said nothing, unwilling to leave Luke's side. Nurse Clara Jensen paused in the doorway, frowning at Hannah's pale face. "You don't look right, honey." "I'm fine," Hannah insisted, but her words ended in a gasp as pain seized her again. Clara's eyes widened. "Those are contractions. How long?" "Since breakfast," Hannah admitted, gripping the chair arms. "Lord have mercy, child. Why didn't you say something?" Clara rushed to her side, helping her stand. "We need to get you to maternity right now." The hospital windows rattled as wind howled outside. Snow was falling so thick now it looked like static on a television screen. Hannah's water broke just as they reached the elevator, making her cry out in surprise and fear. "The roads are completely blocked," she heard someone say. "Emergency vehicles can't get through." The maternity ward was 3 floors up. Between contractions, Hannah kept looking back toward Luke's room. "Please," she begged Clara. "I can't leave him alone." Clara's face softened. "Honey, you're about to have a baby. Then bring him to me." Hannah clutched the nurse's hand. "Please, I need him there." Clara exchanged looks with the other nurses, then nodded slowly. "We'll figure something out." The next hour passed in a blur of pain and movement. They wheeled Hannah's bed into Luke's room, positioning it beside his. Medical equipment crowded the space as staff prepared for the delivery. Through it all, Hannah reached across the gap between beds, holding Luke's limp hand. "I'm scared," she whispered to him during a particularly strong contraction. "I wish you were really here." The storm raged outside, but inside the room time seemed to stand still. Hannah's labor progressed quickly, her body knowing what to do even as her mind raced with fear. The doctor arrived, looking concerned about the unusual setup, but saying nothing when he saw the determination in Hannah's eyes. "Almost there," Clara encouraged, wiping Hannah's forehead with a cool cloth. "One more big push." Hannah squeezed Luke's hand as she bore down, tears mixing with sweat. The room filled with a new sound, the strong, angry cry of a baby taking his first breath. "It's a boy!" the doctor announced, laying the tiny red bundle on Hannah's chest. Hannah gazed down at her son through tears, counting fingers and toes, marveling at his perfect little face. "Hello, Luke," she whispered. "Luke Myers." The baby's cries softened as she spoke, his tiny hand curling around her finger. Hannah turned to the still form in the next bed. "Did you hear that? I named him after you." She noticed something then, the smallest twitch of Luke's fingers in her hand. The heart monitor showed a slight change in rhythm, its steady beeping growing just a bit stronger. With trembling hands, Hannah lifted her son. "Clara, could you—" The nurse helped her position the baby so she could place his tiny hand over Luke's weathered one. "There," Hannah said softly. "You're not alone anymore, either of you." The baby cooed, and Hannah could have sworn she felt Luke's fingers curl ever so slightly around his namesake's tiny hand. That night, exhausted but unable to sleep, Hannah lay watching her son in the clear hospital bassinet. The storm had begun to ease, moonlight occasionally breaking through the clouds to cast silver light across the room. Clara came in to check vitals, moving quietly between the 3 patients. Hannah noticed the nurse's expression change as she studied Luke's monitors. "What is it?" "Well," Clara said slowly, double-checking the readings. "His numbers are better. Not by much, but it's the first improvement we've seen." Hannah reached out in the darkness, finding Luke's hand again. "Keep fighting," she whispered. "We need you here." The baby sighed in his sleep, and somewhere in the distance, the storm began to break. Through the window, stars peeked through gaps in the clouds, their light touching 3 generations of healing hearts in the quiet hospital room. 3 weeks passed like a dream, filled with midnight feedings and tiny fingers grasping at the world. Every afternoon, Hannah bundled baby Luke in soft blankets and drove through the winter sunshine to the hospital. The nurses in the maternity ward cooed over the infant while Hannah made her way to the ICU, hope and worry tangled in her heart. On this particular afternoon, she sat in the familiar chair beside Luke's bed, little Luke sleeping peacefully in her arms. Sunlight streamed through the window, warming them as she sang "Amazing Grace" softly. her voice barely above a whisper. "Kid looks just like me," a raspy voice murmured behind her. Hannah froze, her heart skipping a beat. She turned slowly, afraid she'd imagined it. But there was Luke, eyes open, looking thinner and paler than before, but unmistakably awake. "Luke!" Tears sprang to her eyes as she stood carefully, mindful of the sleeping baby. "Don't cry, kid." His voice was weak, but his eyes sparkled. "You'll get the little one started." Hannah laughed through her tears, carefully perching on the edge of his bed. "Would you like to hold him?" Luke's weathered hands trembled slightly as she placed the baby in his arms. The infant stirred, opening eyes the same shade of blue as the old biker's. "Well, look at that," Luke whispered, touching one tiny fist with his finger. "Hello there, namesake." Over the next few days, Luke grew stronger. Physical therapists worked with him daily, teaching his muscles to remember their purpose. Hannah watched proudly as he took his first shaky steps down the hospital corridor, determination etched on his face. Linda visited regularly, bringing containers of homemade soup and fresh bread. "Can't heal on hospital food," she'd say, fussing over Luke like he was one of her own. The hospital staff, who had once viewed Luke with suspicion, now greeted him warmly. They'd stop to chat or show him pictures of their families. Even Dr. Stevens, known for his stern demeanor, would smile when checking Luke's progress. One afternoon, Hannah noticed Luke fingering the silver cross pendant she'd given him months ago. He caught her watching and gave a sheepish grin. "Guess the big guy wasn't done with me yet," he said quietly. "Gave me a second chance at family." The seasons turned like pages in a well-loved book, and before anyone knew it, a full year had passed. Thanksgiving morning dawned crisp and bright, sunlight sparkling off fresh snow outside Hannah's renovated apartment. Inside, warmth and laughter filled every corner. Baby Luke Jr., now walking and babbling, toddled between his grandmother Linda's legs as she arranged flowers on the windowsill. The air was rich with the scent of roasting turkey and fresh-baked rolls. Luke, clean-shaven and wearing a pressed blue shirt, looked years younger than the broken man Hannah had found on that icy road. These days, he spent his time at the New Beginnings halfway house, helping former inmates find their footing in the world. His gentle guidance had already helped dozens of men find jobs and rebuild their lives. The dining table groaned under the weight of traditional dishes: golden turkey, cranberry sauce, buttery mashed potatoes, and Linda's famous pecan pie. Before they sat down, Hannah reached for Luke's weathered hand, forming their familiar circle of prayer. "Last year," Hannah said softly, her voice full of emotion, "I thought I missed Thanksgiving. Turns out that's when it finally found me." Luke squeezed her hand, tears glistening in his eyes as he looked around at his unexpected family. Near the window, the silver cross pendant caught the candlelight, dancing with quiet radiance, a testament to how grace could arrive in the most unexpected ways, sometimes wearing leather and bearing scars. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.